morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Today we have Brent Adamson as our guest. Brent, for those of you who do not know him, is the man who co-authored the Challenger series of books that defined personality-driven selling. Brent is also the distinguished VP from Gartner in a value engineering savant. Brent earned his doctorate from the University of Michigan, where he was the president of the Men's Glee Club. Welcome, Brent.
Hey, Taylor. Hey, everybody. That's not something that makes it into the bio very often. But it's something I'm kind of proud of. But I will not be breaking out in song during the call today.
XAQ gets to all the insights, Brent.
Yeah, exactly. Your AI dug that up somewhere, I'm sure.
And joining Brent is our CEO and founder, Usman Sheikh, who was formerly with SAP, where he held leadership positions in product management and sales enablement. Coincidentally, Usman is also a grad of the University of Michigan. Brent wrote the books on personality-driven selling, and Usman developed the world's first personality-driven sales and marketing platform. Brent, if you could please start us out with today's conversation by briefly introducing yourself.
Happy to, Taylor, and thank you very much. So, hey, everybody, hope you guys are all doing well today, wherever you are in the world, whatever time zone you're in. We'll keep this, I would imagine, Usman, pretty casual and informal, and want to make sure that it's engaging for all of you. So I'm in Northern Virginia in the United States, where I'm located. I've got the chat box open. If you've got questions you guys would like to talk about as we go, feel free to ask questions and we'll try to address them as we go. Taylor mentioned I was for many, many years at CEB, or Corporate Executive Board, which ultimately became Gartner about 5 or 6 years ago. And after about a 20-year run there, I departed Gartner in May of this year, and shortly thereafter joined a company called Ecosystems. And we can talk a little bit about that as we go, Usman, if you'd like. But Ecosystems because every company is these days, is a software as a service platform specifically designed around what's called value management or value engineering. So it's a tool to help help companies, I should say, sit down with their customers and outline step by step in a very principled fashion, what are the outcomes you're trying to achieve? What are the metrics you use to measure those outcomes? And then how do we ensure that over time we collaboratively define those things and ensure that you're getting value from that relationship? And Usman, I'd imagine that this idea of value is going to become a pretty important part of our conversation.
Absolutely. Just about, Brent, kind of jumping the gun a little bit, and I still want you to introduce yourself, finishing your introduction, but the single most frequent asked question today is, I need to be able to justify the ROI. And it's all about ROI, and actually tangible ROI. Nothing soft is making it past the CFO's desk anymore. But we will be, of course, talking about it a little bit more in detail.
Yeah. Well, that was all I had to say about me, because I hate talking about me. It's very embarrassing. So as you guys, many of you will know, I was part of the Challenger work. There's a huge body or a group of people behind that body of work. And it's something, of course, that we're very proud of. I've since then spent a lot of my time in my research at Gartner and then beyond looking less and less about selling, although I still do, and more about buying and how buying behavior is changing and changing dramatically. And then going back into the supplier organization, thinking very hard about what does that mean, not just for selling and for that matter, marketing, but what does it mean for things like org structure and go-to-market strategy, and how we think about how we as a supplier organization work with our customers and face off to a marketplace when our traditional or legacy silos are frankly no longer aligned in any fashion to how customers are actually buying. So that's a huge statement, isn't it? But there's a ton of work there. But what's really interesting is that, in all of that, and what's why you and I know each other well, even though we're at Michigan at the same time, we weren't hanging out together then, but I think where we're aligned today is so much of this, these big themes about buying and selling, they come back to humanness, if it were, and who we are as not just as sellers and buyers, but who we are as people. And I think that's where the story gets really, really interesting and also really complicated.
Beautiful. So we've got a pretty full agenda. Taylor, if you can help us get started, please.
Yeah, of course. So today we're going to be sharing a lot of information and insights. We'll be going through what is B2B sales, what is changing, what is personality-driven selling, creating those tangible value drivers, and why it really all matters. So Usman, if you could kick us off with what is B2B sales?
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. And welcome, Brent. Thanks, Taylor. B2B sales is the commerce that exists and the transactions that take place between two businesses. This is, we come across B2C in our daily retail lives all the time. But the interesting fact is that B2B commerce today, Brent, I didn't realize this till I was actually doing some research, is $15 trillion a year. And it dwarfs, by comparison, B2C, which is $3 trillion, right? So there's a lot of big ticket item sales that are taking place. And B2B sales are those cycles that actually enable this transaction to take place. This is how the supply chain runs. This is how even the B2C commerce runs. And behind them are businesses buying large volumes of goods, products, and services. And B2B selling is the art and the science of being able to go and manage how to actually engage and sell the buyers. And Brent, maybe you can also tell us, there are certain factors. We know now that the number of buyers, you just mentioned that the humanization of sales has consistently been there and will, for the foreseeable future, stay there. But what we are also noticing is that whereas there were 2 or 3 people in the past that you had to convince, the number of decision makers and stakeholders has really grown, right? So you have these long sales cycles, 6 to 18 month long sales cycle, a lot of decision makers, a lot of churn happening in the industry. So a lot of new players coming in and out of that industry. And you have to be able to orchestrate and walk through that whole environment to be able to close a deal where you have changing players, multiple players, educated buyers. This is another very important factor in B2B sales. People that have been put in charge of making these multi-million-dollar decisions are usually experienced, well-educated, know the market, understand what their use cases are, and they're earn their right to be able to buy on behalf of their companies, right? So these are just some of the key traits to kind of consider in terms of how these B2B transactions are taking place, and what are some of the underlying factors that we should be aware of in terms of and considerations we should move forward with in terms of when we bring out change and improvement into B2B selling. We have to be able to address these various factors, right? So tell us a little bit, you've been at the forefront of writing books on, the humanization of sales and why personality matters. Tell us from your experience, Brent, what are you seeing in terms of the changing face of what is B2B sales, first of all? Let's start with that in your definition. And then we'll get into how things are changing.
There's a lot to unpack there, Usman, but so in terms of just definitions, B2B, B2C, that's probably pretty clear to everyone. The fact that B2B is so much greater, or larger, I should say, is perhaps not surprising if you think about it, because any B2C sale, anything that we buy as consumers, has, as you mentioned, behind it a whole supply chain of B2B transactions to allow that thing to come to market in the first place, whether it's logistics, whether it's assembly, whether it's subparts that have to be, put together and designed, you name it. So you guys can all kind of figure that out. But the thing, though, that's nonetheless interesting is, because I've been involved at Gartner, I was involved for a number of years in our B2C marketing practice, along with our B2B marketing practice. Spent a lot of time talking about consumer marketing and how to market consumer goods and how that changes. And one of the things that always fascinated me, Usman, which we can put a pin in this and come back to it later if people would like to, but is the way I always think about it is that B2C, the dynamics of B2C commerce generally seem to be, in my impression, is anecdotal, but about 5 years ahead of B2B. So in other words, if you want to kind of know what's going to happen 5 years from now in B2B commerce, take a look at what's happening in B2C commerce today. And that would be things like digital and how customers are buying through digital, and not just the opportunities and the way they engage with us, but also the struggles and the challenges that they face. And that will become a big part of the story, because the other way that I think B2B is different, because I mentioned already, I kind of threw the gauntlet down and said it's really all about human beings. But here's where I think it gets really interesting on the B2B side, because this is something that people have been debating and discussing for years. There was probably about 10 years ago, there was a lot of momentum around renaming B2B B2P. In other words, and the argument was, it's not business to business, it's business to people, because at the end of the day, it's not businesses that buy things, it's people that do. And I think that sounds like it would resonate exactly with what I said before. It's all about humans, and I'd agree to a point. But this is where it actually gets really interesting in the B2B world, because I would argue that while it is true that it's not businesses that buy things, it's people that do. And business to business is not people that buy things, but groups of them that do. And that may be true on the on the consumer side of, a parent or a mom or dad buying on behalf of their family or something. So there's some group decisions, but more so in the B2B space, these are groups of, in the challenger customer, we talked about the 5.4 people involved in a purchase. That number went up every year after that, after we tested that. It now sits for a lot of us practically, easily in the double digits, which by the way, is a great anecdote real quick on this. So I was talking to a head of sales and logistics a couple of years ago before the pandemic, and he said that they had just flown up to see one of their biggest customers close a multi-million-dollar deal, the biggest deal in the history of their company. They walk into the conference room where the deal was going to go. They thought the deal was going to go down. They were going to get, the whole thing signed. And there were 17 different stakeholders from the customer organization in that room. And the kicker was, many of whom not only had they not met, but many of them had not met each other before in person. And again, this is before the pandemic, when that was less of a logical thing to happen, which led me to conclude, it's always a bad thing to try to get a deal done when the first thing on the agenda is that the customer stakeholders are introducing themselves to each other. It's like we start, like, the first thing you do in a customer meeting these days, at least for those in person, is you go get more chairs. So this actually, and then it gets really interesting, Usman, because then you can begin to think about, all right, the question I always ask, and I've asked for 5-6 years now, is who's at that table, virtually or in person, who's at that table today who wasn't there 2 years ago? And that's, I think, where it's especially interesting. It's not just that the numbers are growing, but it's the diversity of those people that's expanding as new stakeholders come to that table. So, for example, compliance officers today and information security and legal are showing up today in ways that they were just not part of the discussion 2, 3, 4 years ago with GDPR, with data security issues and everything being tech driven. IT, showed up about 10 years ago. It used to be I'd sell to my target audience. All of a sudden now I've got a tech enabled solution. All of a sudden IT is like there. Procurement's always been there and so on. And it's the fact that all of these different stakeholders represent different functions, different geographies, different levels, and as a result have different priorities and metrics that they're being measured on and trying to accomplish on behalf of their company. That's what makes it so hard. It's not just there's 16 people, but there's essentially 16 mental models inside that room that you have to somehow align. And this, the last point, then I'll take a breath, Usman, but there's one more thing on this one around B2B. This is where I think you and I think ultimately we'd find we're aligned, but I would 180-degree disagree with you just for the sake of good conversation, if nothing else, which is, while I appreciate your point that these are professionals and they are educated and they are well-trained and they are making, they're skilled to make decisions on behalf of their company. The flip side is, because they're human beings and because they've been put in these positions to make very high stakes, multi-million-dollar decisions on behalf of their company, and they've got to do it with a group of other people with whom they are worried about their credibility. The thing that I have found, and we at Gartner had found in our research consistently, is that these individuals, frankly, are not very confident in their ability to make large-scale decisions on behalf of their company. They're nervous to make a mistake. They're facing a whole series of challenges, which I'm happy to walk through, that make B2B buying really, really hard. And so understanding these stakeholders and their mental models and their profiles and their, if you will, their insecurities and the drivers of eroding, the forces that erode their confidence become critical here, because I think what customers are really facing in B2B today is not so much that they lack confidence in you, the supplier, your product, your brand, you as a sales rep. They lack confidence in themselves across a range of dimensions. And so all of that is like, so what is B2B today? It's a mess is what it is. That's what it is. It's complicated, it's fraught, it's very human. And that's what makes it so interesting to study.
Yeah, absolutely correct. And you're absolutely right that, it's walking into a meeting and seeing that there are stakeholders who are meeting for the first time is definitely a red flag.
Yeah.
But it's also a reality, right?
Yeah.
And to your point, right, maybe the reason the numbers of people that are involved in the decision-making process have increased is because you need that consensus nobody wants to take on that single ownership of that risk.
That's right. Well, other thing, Usman, I think in some ways we've done it to ourselves as suppliers, and with good reason. So as we've sought to build better, more integrated solutions to help our customers solve bigger, more complex business problems, which is the right thing to do because it's how you differentiate yourself and prevent yourself from being easily replicated, and you protect yourself from fast followers to offer not just products. And this is why there's a whole sidebar discussion about PLG or product-led growth here, which is problematic and fascinating. But so we move to these broader solutions. But as we say, hey, look, our solution, usually, of course, these days, backed by or built on technology, is going to allow us to help you across a broader range of needs and a broader range of stakeholders. That's fantastic insofar as it's a potential differentiator and offering more value. It's a problem in that each of those different stakeholders that we now say our solution touches are going to have naturally a say in what actually gets bought. So it's not just that all of these people have come to the table as a result of government regulation or just for the heck of it. It's because we've effectively attracted them through the breadth of our solution, which I'm not suggesting therefore we should narrow our solution. I think it's just a natural outcome of what was a smart strategy that it's like whack-a-mole. It's like we solve one problem, differentiation through solutions, but now we got a new problem. It's like, now I got to wrangle all these cats, right? And figure that out.
Yeah. On the one hand, we are building these business return on investment cases, right? Which we can sell to the business side of the equation, but then suddenly legal comes in or information security comes in, and their job by definition is to start finding holes, right?
Yeah.
And those can cause expensive delays because the opportunity cost of the business case you've built, you're pushing it further out by
that's right,
really adding in. So you've got stakeholders that you've trained that are on your side, that are your internal client champions, that have never spoken to legal, that have never spoken to data privacy. And so how should they actually be approaching them? Around subject matters. So they're always, we see that a lot of our clients come and ask us like, hey, I need to answer to these guys. What are my answers? So we're constantly even preparing and guiding these potential buyers, not only in terms of how to talk to their clients, get better prepared, understand what are the key stakeholders within the organization doing, be able to build that business value case, but that business value case can be thrown out the window because legal has some issue with the contract, right? And it can be significantally delayed, and your stakeholder doesn't know how to address that.
That's right. It's interesting. So this is it's a worthwhile exercise if you've ever, and I've done it. So maybe I can do it on behalf of all of you guys. So you don't have to do it yourselves. But particularly prior to the pandemic, when I was traveling, every week out with heads of sales, heads of marketing, senior leaders around the world while I was still at Gartner, I did for a number of years. It's a very simple thought exercise. I would simply ask all of those senior executives to think back to a time in their own organization when they were part of a large-scale purchase decision on behalf of their company. Maybe it's a software platform, maybe it's a consulting engagement, a training, whatever it might be. A multi 6 to 7 figure deal that they were in. And then I'd say, well, think about the time it took, think about the people involved, think about the decisions you had to make. And then I do this. I'd say, now, if you were to give me one word, one adjective to describe that entire experience inside of your company, what would that word be? And invariably, Usman, not surprising, those words were all negative. I think I heard one. I did this literally with thousands of people over the years, and I think I heard one positive word. It was always frustrating, long, hard. Landmine issue was one of my favorites. My all-time favorite was a CMO in Chicago who said, you know what her word was, Usman? Her word was, I never want to do that again. That was her word. It was one word, I never want. And it begs this question, which is, how do you sell in a world when the first word that your customers think of, not when buying your solution, but when buying solutions like yours, right? The first word they think of is, I never want to do that again. It's because buying, and for that matter, deciding, has become so complex, so fraught. And it's like, and so what customers really, we can pivot to this a little bit, but what I think customers really want in this world is just help. Is just help me feel more confident that I know who to talk to, when to talk to them. Help me feel more confident that we're making the right choice. Help me feel more confident that we've even asked the right questions. Because, and oh, by the way, and what's really ironic is, and so you say, well, here's my sales rep. Say, oh, no, I don't want to talk to a sales rep because that's the last thing I want to do. I wanted confidence. I didn't want to be sold. So there's just so many fascinating, complex physics of going on here that I think are really, really important to understand and unpack.
Yeah, that's really great. It's very interesting because on our chat line, we have a comment that kind of feeds in really nicely, which is how do online B2B communities play a role in the purchase process? And I think this is where they can come in. My experience at SAP in building their SAP store has been that these online communities really fill a major gap, information gap, knowledge gap that your prospects are looking for. And same way, these B2B buying communities can help by providing answers. Like you can even put questions like, how should I deal with my lawyers? Or I'm kind of oversimplifying it. Right?
I get you.
Right. But like, how should I, what are certain issues in GDPR and so on? What are my, position? What is your position? And people will pontificate on that. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a couple ways you could think about this. One is, this is why I think there's so much interest in, particularly in the SaaS world. And in fact, this is what I was hired. One of the things I was hired to do at ecosystems is to create a buyer community, right? So if we can create a community of users and buyers and deciders, and just put them in touch with each other and create an energy of conversation among them, that provides a source of social proof for those individuals to feel more confident about their decisions. Again, I talked about sort of B2B and B2C. B2B is 5 years behind B2C. This has been a play in B2C for the better part of 10 years. You think about Amazon and all of the reviews, or any other platform where I can see what other people like me have bought, have decided the 4-star, this is 4.5 stars versus 4.2 stars. And we begin to see that now in all sorts of ways in the B2B side too. Is not so much stars per se, starring systems, but just make it easier for me to go out and get the evidence that I need from others like me who've gone on this journey before, to feel more confident, not in you, but to feel more confident in me. So things like customer testimonials usually are designed to testify to how awesome we are. So if one of my customers or prospects wants a customer testimonial, traditionally I go find someone who loves my product and loves me and say, go tell them how great I am, right? That's customer testimonial in the old world. In the new world, a customer testimonial, I would say, hey, I know you managed to successfully finish across the finish line and buy our solution. I'm very happy with it. Could you go talk to this customer? Don't even talk about me or our solution. Just talking about your own experience of going on that journey. What would you, if you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently? Who would you get involved in earlier? If you were to go on this journey again, what advice would you have for yourself or for others? And so that's one way to do this. There's other ways to equip your sales reps to have these kinds of conversations, but this whole idea of essentially becoming a deciding coach or a buying coach or a Sherpa, a guide for your customers, I think becomes really important because of the kind of, well, there you go, the data that you see here on the screen. This is the reality we're up against, isn't it, Usman?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really interesting. Just before we jump into this screen, but I just want to highlight one thing you said, that when the buyer is saying, I never want to go through this process, that's a huge challenge.
That's a red flag, isn't it? It's not good, people. Right.
But you and us at XIQ, we are focused on the sellers more so. But there's very important advice for buyers over here also as to how they need to potentially streamline their process. Because not only is the process becoming complex, we know, as we are seeing on this screen, it's a changing landscape, Brent. Things, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, even though they were sort of on a slow, movement towards this direction, that just got fast-tracked in the last 2 years, right? Yeah. Virtual selling, remote selling, multiple decision makers, how to convince them, buyers not wanting to meet sellers, the window of time that sellers and buyers have together. The buyer today is much more educated, and there's 6 of them, 12 of them versus 1 or 2 of you. They're much more educated on the market. They're much more educated on your product. And on top of that, the great attrition, losing buyers and sellers. There's a lot of churn that's happening place in the sales organization and the buyer organization. And so, on top of that, as you're saying, that the buying process is complex, the buyer side of the equation is complex, and the selling side of the equation is complex, right?
That's right.
So how does B2B move forward? What else are you seeing that, these are kind of, but here, Brent, let me ask you this. I've read a lot of reports that say, in spite of all these factors, the fact that we've moved to virtual and we're not going to offices, etc., Salesforce productivity has actually gone up. What do you have to say about that? What do you?
What about that, Brent? Yeah. Oh man. I'm trying not to go on a rant, but Salesforce productivity in terms of the number of in-mails that I receive on LinkedIn that are completely irrelevant and undesired has gone up. So therefore my Salesforce is more productive. I don't know. I mean, I guess so, right? If you look at this through activity-driven metrics, oh yeah, we're productive because I just hired 15 more SDRs to spam the world with unwanted phone calls. So sorry, that was a bit of a rant, but you get what I mean. So I guess it depends on what we're talking about productivity. Because I look at this stuff, Usman, and I used to joke with our head of research at Gartner, a guy named Eric Braun, is a dear friend of mine, brilliant guy. And I used to bug him about stuff like this because he's a very rational guy, and you can tell I'm not. So I'm pretty irrational. But I used to tell him when I look at all this data and the story that we just laid out, Usman, I mean this kind of sincerely, is it's kind of crazy to me that commerce hasn't ground to a complete halt altogether. The fact that even commerce still happens at all is kind of amazing, actually. And that's when Eric would always say, Brent, you're an idiot. Of course, commerce is still going to happen, right? Because we need to keep production lines running. We need to replenish. There's 1,000 reasons why commerce will not grind to a halt. I totally get it. But it does nonetheless make me wonder just how much more commerce could happen if we could just help our customers feel more confident in their ability to make bigger decisions on behalf of their company. It's not that we just out competed the competition or put more opportunities in the top of the pipeline that are quite frankly fake to begin with, but rather that we solved for how do we get more decisions made. I think what we have right now is not a buying problem. We have a deciding problem. And that's where I think this stuff gets really, really interesting and really, really human. But if I may, though, because there is one way to solve this. It's not where we'll go today, probably in terms of for the balance of our time around sort of sales and marketing and customer engagement. But there's a different way to solve for this challenge, which I think we actually do see in the SaaS world, particularly. This kind of led the way on this. When I look at the SaaS world, oftentimes, Usman, which I now recognize I'm part of it, I get frustrated sometimes because it seems like they claim to be 10 years ahead of everything while they're actually 10 years behind. And if that was a bit of a dig, I apologize, but it's kind of true. But where I think SaaS has gotten it right on is not on the selling level, but on the strategic level, which is what if we took our solution and actually skinnied it back down? We sold it in terms of a 1-month trial as opposed to a 3-year contract. We sold it on a seat basis as opposed to an enterprise basis. By taking your thing that you're selling and reducing the unit of time or the unit of scope that you're selling, you make it easier for individuals to buy it on their own at a lower price point, at a lower level of risk, at a lower level of cost, such that you overcome some of these challenges of the complexity of buying that we're talking about. So that, I think, is in fact one legitimate way to address these challenges, less through go-to-market execution and more through go-to-market strategy. And the challenge there, by the way, just was like, oh, that's our panacea. The challenge with that is essentially it's land and expand, right? The challenge with land and expand is it makes it easier to land, perhaps, but you still have to bleeping expand, right? And so in other words, all you're really doing is deferring the problem as opposed to solving the problem, because it's now I got 3 seats or 2 people or 4 months at this particular customer, but now the pressure's on to turn that into 20 seats or 10, 3 years. And so you're kind of right back where you started from. And this is where I do get frustrated with SaaS, because the answer is, well, let's hire more SDRs to bang the phones to get a couple more lands. It's like, yeah, but have y'all thought about how the expansion of this thing's going to work? Because that's where you run right back into the teeth of the problem that we've been talking about. I don't know if that resonates with you, but that's what I really see going on.
It absolutely, it's the qualitative versus the quantitative discussion, right? And so even though that because of time being more available, because we're not going to the offices, we have more opportunities, maybe to start making phone calls and start calling out. The problem still remains that, garbage in, garbage out, right? If you don't have the right process and the right tools in place that will help you actually get prepared, preparation is a huge part of being able to reach out. And we're going to talk a little bit about that because, that's one of the things that XIQ does, is that it helps you get prepared and really get to understand the various different buyers. But making 10 times more calls, which are all poorly thought through, is going to actually create 10 times more problems rather. And, I constantly hear this in the sales. We've got to have tools that can give us contact information, emails and so on, or intent data. And I'm like, okay, so you get these 2 things now. You've got a phone number. You can actually get, somebody to actually fire. And I use the word fire on purpose, an email, or it's like a bullet in a way, or a phone call, right? But have you ever trained them?
Actually, hold on. Let's play with that metaphor for just. I'm a metaphor guy. I can't resist. You know what it is? It's not a bullet. It is firing, but you know what it is? It's the laser guns in Star Wars. So Star Wars is famous for the guns, the stormtroopers who shoot a massive number of laser fire and never freaking hit anything. That's what it is. It's Star Wars. That's what it is. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Yeah, that's an after analogy as well. But you know, that's exactly right. So just kind of equipping them is suicidal in a lot of ways, right? Because if you don't have the right temperament, the right reason, the right knowledge, and knowing who's on the table and how this process is going to get executed, you're actually going to create 10 times more problems. So that's really, really interesting. And
right. You wind up exacerbating the underlying problems that you were ultimately trying to solve for because you're not fully aware of them. To put a point on this, actually, Usman, if I could, because it'll lead into everything I think we want to talk about from here forward, and it certainly is where I live now and at Ecosystems, the company is. If I had to put a point on, I think customers are struggling from 4 challenges, and they're all big challenges. And these are worth jotting down. If grab your pen, everybody, I'm about to drop an insight on you. Maybe I don't know if it's insight, but this is the way I see it. It's number 1 is decision complexity. So it's just the number of people that we talked about this already, just the number of people, the number of processes, the number of steps, the opaqueness. I never want to do that again. So decision complexity. The second one is information overload. So as we've all decided that we have to become thought leaders in our industry and that we're going to differentiate not on how we sell, but not on what we sell, but how we sell by, and through content marketing and creating more content and having better data and better experts. What we've done is I call this the smartness arms race. And so essentially what we've done is we just wound up confusing our customers at a higher level because you've got data and you're telling me to zig and I've got data and I'm telling you to zag and now I don't know what to do because you're both convincing. So decision complexity, information overload. The third one that really showed up in the data and research from a colleague and friend of mine named Hank Barnes over at Gartner is implementation uncertainty. So yes, you guys' stuff is great, but will we be able to actually implement this solution in our organization? Will it fit? Will we know what to do? Will we screw it up somehow? And again, it's not that I doubt you, it's I doubt us as a company. So decision complexity, information overload, implementation uncertainty. And then the fourth one is where I live now is what I would call value opacity. And some people don't like the word opacity because they think it sounds fancy, but basically unclarity is just not a word, right? But we're uncertain on how do we even measure success? What are we even trying to do? And what are the metrics, the KPIs that would use to determine whether or not we're being successful? And if your customers suffer from any of these, and I would argue they suffer from all of them, decision complexity, information overload, implementation uncertainty, and value opacity, good luck. Hey, and by the way, could you spend $10 million? Great. That's how likely, Usman, is that to happen? What I'm going to do is I'm going to look to defer that and study it more. I'm going to get even more people's input because I don't want to be out in which is going to make things worse. I'm going to, just decide not to decide. It's not that I'm embracing or love status quo. It's just I'm terrified to change, which is the subject of my colleague and co-author Matt Dixon's got a new book out this week called The Jolt Effect. And the whole book is about this very phenomenon, which is it's not fear of missing out, it's fear of messing up, right? Which I think is a really great way of articulating a lot of what's going on here.
Yeah. So what I hear you say is that irrespective of us trying to sell a smaller deal, which is a little bit more digestible, the challenge of convincing those 4 factors, decision complexity, information overload, implementation uncertainty, and value opacity, these are just being deferred. And, that battle has to be fought, right?
That's right.
And increasingly, Brent, you're not there to fight that battle, right? This is being fought in a corporate boardroom, in a meeting room, where there's 12 to 20 people that have probably never met, trying to have a discussion, and your guy,
and you're not there.
Is basically trying to defend against legal, against finance, against IT, against user experience, against value creation, all those factors, right? So the game changing, the change over here from what I'm hearing you say is that and maybe shed some light on this. I know you've written papers in Harvard Business Review about guiding your customer, right? But I think maybe let's kind of frame this first as to what is the situation where today B2B sellers are experiencing, right? So I'm talking to one person, and then we see this all the time. We have one point of contact who's engaging with us, collecting a lot of information, and they have to then go talk to 20, 30, 40 people. Some of those might be involved in a POC with us, right? And then that smaller thing. So tell us a little bit about what's going on over there, and what are some of the key challenges that we're seeing when we talk about getting into these consensus-based decision cycles.
So to put a really fine point on, I like to take big complex ideas and try to boil them down into simple statements or just language that helps us all kind of frame it up in our heads and wrap our brains around what's going on. And I think there's a particularly evocative way to do that with this scenario right now. So as we head into what seems to be pretty likely is going to be a recession, at least softening of the economy. This looks, and if it's going to get worse or just we're going to bump along one way or another, we're in a tough place where very tough questions are being asked. And so everything right now, as you know, Usman, we all know, is coming back to some really tough conversations around value. Like, are we getting for what we're spending, are we getting our money's worth from this software, frankly, from these people, right? These are hard conversations with human implications. When I think about it for suppliers right now, particularly those who are selling in a recurring revenue model, so a renewal base or a monthly contract or even a consumption-based model, where these things can be revisited without significant switching costs on a regular basis. That's what seemed like a really great idea. Let's sell subscription because that recurring revenue. There's all sorts of good reasons to do that, but now the chickens come home to roost. Pick your metaphor in a downturn like this, because here's the point I was trying to make. The scenario is this, and it's a very real scenario. It's happening right now. Is your customer, that is your champion, your mobilizer, the person who loves your product. Your customer is about to have a very tough conversation about your product with their CFO. That's the reality. That's happening right now. Your customer is about to have a very tough conversation about your product with their CFO. And the obvious question off of that might be, Usman, is, are you ready? Are you ready to have that conversation? But the better question is, are they ready? Right? Just how confident are you that your customer, your mobilizer, your champion is ready to have that conversation with their CFO about your solution? If you're a control freak like me, that will send shivers down your spine, right? Because that's a terrifying place potentially to be. How confident are you that that person is confident in themselves to have that conversation?
And let me just add to that, right? So it's not just your CFO, it's also the others that are involved in the decision-making cycle.
That's fair. Totally. Yeah.
And it is that group of people that the CFO will turn to get validation.
That's right.
On what your champion has actually, positioned in front of the CFO. So now we're in this predicament that we have got this 12.5 people involved in the decision cycle, and there's discussions going on around our product. And we're not there, right?
Yeah.
So what is the guidance? So how should the sellers, and I think this is an absolutely pertinent problem that exists in 100% of the situations today. Absolutely correct. And this is, like I said, I've been saying this throughout. Our number one question that our clients are asking is, explain the ROI. Justify, help me sell your product within the company. We hear this a lot. So
yeah.
So one is to kind of provide them all the product literature and kind of beef them up on those things. But
no, it's not. You can't throw a white paper.
One factor is that, right? Of course,
I'm with you. I know we're aligned on this, but right. But that's the inclination. Is like throw a white paper, throw a calculator at this, right? And that will solve it. And it really won't, right? But keep going. I'm sorry.
No, but that's what I was saying. That's one way of kind of addressing the quantitative part of it, right? Yep. I have provided you and I've furnished you with all the data and the tools and the business case. But that we do that, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But it doesn't work because now that person A needs to understand what you put together for them. B, assuming that you've run a POC and they still get it, right? The other thing is you've still got to get those guys to be talking to other people. And it goes back to that human discussion, right? How do I engage? I might be a doer. So when we look at XIQ's buyer groups, we'll see how your personality model can put you into a doer, coach, or a blocker category. But if I'm a doer, I could be still a very polarizing factor, right? Because I'm a driver, I come in, I'm a dominant person, and I want to steamroll over everybody else, right? And in the process of doing so, guess who's suffering? The sales guy that this champion is representing is suffering because even though he was very well-intentioned and very driven and highly motivated, their personality just rubs off wrong on the other people, or they haven't even thought about it, that it's not one size fits all, that you need to kind of custom and flavor the way you communicate with different personalities within that buyer group.
And you can't fix that by giving them a better calculator, right? In other words, if there's these personality conflicts, like say, well, here's a more precise calculator, is certainly not going to fix the problem. It may, in fact, actually exacerbate the problem, right? So that's in fact, Usman. So I mean, this is why you do what you do at XIQ and why I am now doing what I'm doing at Ecosystems, because I think there's two things that really need to happen in that conversation. Your customers are sitting down with their CFO, and to your point, and all the broader group. The first one is let's go with your point first, which is we used to talk at CEB a lot, even before Gartner, about what we called hold on, I got it. It took me a second. Sorry, not personas, but interpersonal personas, right? So, and this is something we learned actually, and this is the whole first chapter of the Challenger Customers, all about this dynamic, which is what we found is when you get better and better at positioning your offer on the merits of individual stakeholders, what they care about as individuals, you're actually less likely to do a bigger deal, not more likely, which is weird. So it's honestly, it was when I would tell you one of the single most counterintuitive things I ever found in my 20 years of research. It was super interesting. And we explain in the book in a lot of detail what's going on and why it happens. But the idea is that because we have this, not just a buying size problem, but a diversity problem, different mental models, different priorities. If I tailor my offering through calculations, through qualitative metrics to that one person, they still have to go get all those other people on board. And if they're not prepared to speak in those other individuals' languages and speak to their needs, the thing's going to fall apart. So what we talk about a lot is the thing we have to focus on is not doing a better job of connecting individual stakeholders to us, but doing a better job of connecting individual stakeholders to each other. And we used to talk about this in an analog fashion, which is how do I map? So who are those other stakeholders? What are their points of connection? What are their points of disconnect? Where are they most likely to align? What you have is not only an elegant, but an insanely and almost scary, powerful machine to let you do that at a level that we couldn't even imagine when we first came up with this idea. So that's one side. The other side, so where I live in this conversation, is when your customer goes to have that conversation with the CFO, look, we already know what that conversation is going to be about. The conversation is going to be about value, right? It's going to be about what are we getting from this relationship? And to your point, probably at least in the CFO's world, it's going to have to be quantitative, but there could be qualitative aspects to it, as well. So what that tells us is not like, okay, here's your calculator. What we believe deeply at Ecosystems, what I believe deeply personally, which is why I'm at Ecosystems, is that you need to back up. And so if you're trying to fix it at that point, you've already lost because it's too late. What you need to do is, at whatever point early as you can, whether it's in the sale or in the success flow, it goes back to this connecting them to each other point, is that you need to have that group align on what they're even trying to do in the first place. What are we trying to achieve as a company? What are the 2 to 3 outcomes that are highest priority? And what are the drivers of those outcomes? And what are the secondary drivers of those? And do we as a collective buying group or deciding group agree that those things are most important? And then after that, okay, then let's map out the KPIs or the metrics that are going to help us determine whether or not we're making progress against those outcomes. And then let's set some targets of where we want to be at the end of 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, so we know that we're actually moving forward in the right direction. This is what we do at Ecosystems, that entire conversation around what are you trying to do and how will you know when you get there, and moving. And you and I are in both in the same world of, and how would I do that with technology? So how can I do that at scale in a way that doesn't require centers of excellence or specialists or mind readers? In your guys' case, it turns out you have a mind reader. It's called AI. It's crazy cool, right? But that's where I think this stuff gets really interesting. Is we know what that conversation is going to be. We know what those dynamics are going to be. And if we can better prepare not just our sales reps, but our customers to have those conversations with their colleagues by framing them up the right way and then giving them the tools to interact, that feels like a pretty strong recipe for success against at least some of those confidence eroding forces that we talked about.
Brilliant. 2 key takeaways, and then I want to invite Taylor to show us how this could be mitigated, right? So the biggest takeaway for me is the wake-up call, right? And the wake-up call that, it's always been, we knew it, but I think you've articulated it brilliantly, is that, look, guys, it's not you selling your product anymore. It's your champion selling your product within the organization. So that's a big wake-up call, right? Mm-hmm. And even though like I said, it's being told to us, help us sell your product, that is being repeated 6 times a day to us, right? And the other one is pre-positioning. you need to be able to pre-position before, what you're saying, that when you get to the meeting and you start kind of trying to fill in the boxes, that's pre-positioning, right?
Yeah.
And Taylor can, maybe help us see how XIQ would potentially, Brent, address this, right? So at a number of levels, starting with understanding the person, then the buyer group, and maybe figuring out how to build affinity between different stakeholders. Taylor.
Exactly. Thank you, Usman, for the introduction. So we're going to jump right over to our Sales Accelerator platform. This is XIQ's Sales Accelerator, the one stop for buyer group, company, and industry insights. And I'm currently on the homepage that hosts all my relevant target account information. But to really show you the power of XIQ, I'm going to search a name in the navigation bar. In this case, Brent Adamson. So you can search a person, first name, last name, company, and title in company if you don't know exactly who you're looking for.
So Taylor, is that, sorry to interrupt, but is that the Brent Adamson who was the president of the men's glee club at Michigan?
I think it was.
Okay. I think I might know.
But by the way, there's most of it, 99.9% of the people on this call don't know me or have not met me probably. For those that have, howdy. So you may not appreciate just how scary accurate this actually is, particularly change the topic often to keep the conversation going is it's just ask my wife. But this is really fascinating stuff to look at, and sometimes a little embarrassing, to be totally frank, but it's really fascinating.
Cool.
Yeah, and XIQ analyzes that publicly available data on Brent and predicts his personality type based on that really proven behavioral science. So Brent, like you said, you're a motivator personality. XIQ will then give me tips on how to communicate with you, never having met you before. So it says Brent promotes a relaxed and friendly workplace. It encourages innovation and originality. I could double click on all these insights to read them in their entirety. And then,
Usman, can you just, I know I want to be careful of time, but can you just tell us a little about what's going on here now, without giving away the shop secrets? But I mean, because I would tell, like, this thing about, easygoing and creating a culture. It's not, I've never posted about company culture. I've never posted about easygoing. Actually, it's cool to see this because I'd like to think it's accurate, and I think the people I work with hopefully would corroborate that it's accurate. And I feel good about it. Like, even in this call day, like, let's say just put some questions in the chat. So where's that coming from? I never told the world these things. What's going on here?
So let me answer that question by explaining behavioral science and how that works a little bit. So we know, tests like personality assessment tests like DISC or Myers-Briggs or others have existed for a while. And most of these personality tests, assessment tests rely on you answering certain questions in a test. And what you're basically answering and giving away is the choice of words that you would select in describing yourself or describing a situation. And those words that you have selected that have been placed on a menu in the test and you've selected will determine subsequently your personality type.
Yeah.
Right? So guess what? We are today living in the digital social media age, and we're leaving those same words about ourselves all over the internet in the public domain. So what we've done is we've trained an algorithm that simply picks up all publicly available data. We do not purchase anything. We do not go behind anything that a person has said that can be found on a search engine in the public data. We pick it up. When we type in Brent Adamson's name, we find the right Brent Adamson. Our engine goes, picks up all the data that's in the public domain, whether there's a blog, whether there's a public LinkedIn profile, tweet, articles that you may have written. And we now have a corpus of all the words that you have used to describe.
And Usman, how does that work for someone? Because I get this question about your stuff all the time, and I'm sure you've heard 1,000 times. This is softball to you, but for someone like me who's relatively public and is posting a lot, that makes sense. But there are plenty of executives out there who don't have a strong social footprint. So is it? I literally am asking you. This is not a tee up. I literally don't know the answer to this question, so I'm just curious, legitimately, to hear your answer. It's like, how does that work in that case? Is it equally effective or less effective, or can it be done at all? How's that work?
Yeah. So it requires actually not that, it can pick up hundreds of signals to help analyze you. And the more and each signal has a weightage, and that weightage adds up to a confidence level in terms of the prediction, which you see top right next to your nice picture is that our engine feels 80% likelihood what we are predicting about you is correct. Okay.
Got
and
it.
that's based on the footprint and the kind of words and what we've been able to interpret out of it. So one,
Okay.
right? So it picks it up. And so it's surprisingly very little amount of information that is required to predict it at an 70 to 80% degree of accuracy. Right. And accuracy, I say that kind of, but in likelihood of this is who the person will actually end up being. Right. And we get a lot of feedback in terms of, hey, this is really, really scary. How did you do it?
It is scary, and then and you guys didn't make it scary. You're just picking up on the reality that's already out there, right? So but Taylor, I know you're anxious to talk about, okay, once you have this, what do you do with it? So let me kick it back to you. But I could talk about this all day because I just find it so interesting that this reality even exists that we live in now.
We'll have you back to talk about it all day.
Yeah.
So then XIQ also gauges the compatibility between you and the person being viewed with affinity. So here I can see that Brent and I have a medium affinity. XIQ also recommends how I could best engage Brent. And as we're building out our account plans and you're having different decision makers talk to different decision makers and convince them, you can also double check those compatibility. So for example, if I wanted to check Usman's against Brent, I can see that they have a low affinity.
So tell me about this, Usman, because I find this, I don't know if it's hysterical. I find everything hysterically funny, but you and I actually get along pretty well. So this isn't like likelihood to get along with each other. Is it that what's going on here? Because I think people listening to our witty banter today might think that we'd have a high affinity. So what's happening?
Yeah. So actually, you think that we get along.
That's the best thing I've heard all day. Actually, you've been cursing me for the last 40 minutes. Will Adamson please just shut up? I get it. That's so awesome.
The time you rejected me from the men's glee club, I've been holding that up for quite some time. But anyway, coming back to this, so it's behavioral models, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that as individuals we will not get along. As a matter of fact, we get along extremely well in social settings, but the behavioral models are different, right? So when we are working together as professionals, there are different things that I would be valuing from my particular behavioral model versus what you value, which might be in contradiction to certain things. And knowing that up front, that this is how I need to maybe become better at engaging. That's really the answer over here. It's really going back. It's not necessarily looking at individuals as two friends and people that might know each other extremely well on a social setting, but two behavioral models, how that might potentially collapse. And this becomes the foundation of us being able to look and analyze a buyer group. Again, I always caution, it's not necessarily, it's the behavioral model. So you need to be aware that there's potential of low affinity, maybe not with you, but another person who could be very similar characteristics to you. I might have low working compatibility with that individual.
You know what this is, Usman, and Taylor, I'd maybe love to get your thoughts on this. I think I just realized what this is, which is so cool and so powerful, is it's a projection bias detector. What I mean by that is what this tells me is, because I have a very strong projection bias. That is, I assume that everyone else thinks like I do, which is a crappy assumption because I don't even know how I think, right? It's a complete disaster how I think. It's complete chaos in my head, right? And all these different voices. And so what this tells me is, Brent, be careful. Yes, be your true authentic self when talking to Usman, but be sure to position your true authentic self in such a way that's going to relate to him. Don't just, because he's going to think about the world. He's going to value things that are a little bit different than you. So it's almost like a little warning light that goes off, says, be careful of projection bias, because this person is just thinks a little differently than you do. Do you buy that?
Yeah, I agree with that. As a matter of fact, there's a whole HBR article about the bias that people have in terms of even understanding who they are and their self-perception versus what others perceive. And that self-perception can translate into how you respond to those personality assessment tests, and it can skew the outcome of your personality. Whereas a machine learning engine that is analyzing this without the bias, right, can potentially predict it. So maybe the way you perceive yourself, you see yourself as a dominant D, but
Mhm.
in reality, you could be an I influencer, right?
Yeah.
Based on, but and when you answer an assessment test, the way you would, we know what those questions are trying to get at, right? And so
Yeah.
we know how to respond to
That's right.
A, B, or C. And so based, our bias gets in there. And I say, look, if I have to respond introvert, extrovert, of course, I'm going to call myself an extrovert versus an introvert. So this is the question I should answer, right? And so
Yeah.
I can kind of taint the results coming out. Whereas in XIQ, since we're picking up things that you have involuntarily, you have voluntarily put out there and said, it's your natural language, or it's your natural language that
Right.
we're recognizing. And so, yes, you're absolutely right about the personality
It's so cool.
bias detector.
So Taylor, I've totally thrown you off your talk track. I'm so sorry. So, but I've just got my eye on the clock. You're probably sweating bullets right now. So why don't you let me kick it back to you? Sorry.
All good. And Brent and Usman, this is just the tip of the iceberg. XIQ also provides more details, such as when you're in the news, social media posts, your career and educational history, as well as any of those publicly available personal details. But now that I understand Brent and I have identified him as a decision maker, I can go ahead and add him to our buyer group by hitting a follow button. And then XIQ will give me an overview of all my decision makers and helps me uncover who would be a friend, who would be a foe, or a neutral party in that entire sales engagement. And XIQ's AI places these individuals into one of 3 different categories of buyers. We have our doers. They're the confident, fast-paced individuals who are motivated by success, but could be a polarizing factor. We have our coaches who are problem-oriented, expected to take immediate action, but can be inconsistent. And then lastly, we have our blockers, those really strategic thinkers who tend to be speculative and are really fearful of that failure. So knowing upfront how the different people in the buying committee may react helps me lower the risk of getting blindsided, and knowing how they may act together helps me really coach my champion, like Brent and Usman were mentioning.
Yeah, I think that's, Taylor, thank you so much. And Brent, again, continuing to answer your question. So again, based on those behavioral models, right? You can put people into the doer, coaches, and blocker categories.
Yeah.
But now, just recently, talking to you, I see that, this becomes a really good foundation for being able to see whether Kabil and Brent get along, or how should Brent talk to Anthony and Mac and Avinash and Diane Bravo, right?
Yeah.
Or how Diane should talk to Avinash, because again, those are the kind of people, the blocker guys, right? They're not necessarily naysayers, right? They're very nice people, by the way, but it's just that their personalities are such, they'll ask a lot of questions. They'll want to know why. And by doing so, they'll start creating doubt. And by creating doubt, or they will create delay, or they will just put this into, one of those 40% of the deals that are just sitting there, no decision. This will go into that cycle. Right.
And on that, Usman, I'd add 2 quick points. One is, and it's really hard not to, but there's no judgment placed on any of these categories, right? That's not what the software is meant to do. So one could look and say, well, I want the people on the left, they're better than the ones that's not the point at all, is it? So this is without judgment. Just this is how people tend to react to information, interact with information. And this is just reality, right? And that, I think that leads to the second point, which is we're takers on these things, not makers. In other words, the question I would get a lot in the challenger customer work is similar to this, is like, so how do I turn a blocker into a doer? And the answer is, it's not that you turn someone into it. It's rather, what is my strategy for engaging this person given their proclivity to behave in that certain manner, as opposed to how do I flip someone, or how do I find a deal that only has doers? Like, good luck. This is like, human life is more complex than that. So having this level of insight, I think, becomes really, really interesting.
Yeah. And I think that, again, that wake up call you've just given, that you've got to figure out who in this group of people is going to be the person that's going to be your champion, or champions. There could be multiple, and then putting them in a position so that they could actually convince the others. So first, finding who that should be, and then how do you coach them in terms of taking certain information you might be feeding, so they could have that discussion with their CFO, not only on the quantifiable things, but also on the personal side of things, in terms of breaking through, in terms of how we communicate, right?
That's so interesting. If we kind of take a full circle, Usman, when I think about the challenges that we face today around decision complexity, information overload, implementation uncertainty, value opacity, the ones I mentioned, it's that now what we begin to do is get a map of where it's almost like a roadmap to the disconnects, right? It's a roadmap to where it's like mapping the minefield, as I like to call it, of where we're going to run into the pinch points from person to person that are going to exacerbate those 4 dimensions of uncertainty, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've got the slide up, which is talking about tangible value drivers. And, you've talked about the fact that value calculators and benchmark studies and so on, they can go so far, right?
Yeah.
You can have the best of those to kind of beef you up. But if you don't know how to, win the heart and the mind of your prospective colleagues in convincing them, then it's just another quantitative metric, right?
That's right. Yeah.
A lot of these metrics, we've talked a little bit about this, have been dollarized, right? What are your thoughts about it? I mean, to me, that seems like a very logical thing, right? I'm in sales and, I want to have a growth revenue plan. And the only way I'm going to measure it is dollarizing it. What are the downsides of doing that?
Well, one is that, whenever we dollarize things, we have this tendency, I suppose, whenever we quantify things more broadly, there's always this causality debate, right? So, okay, great, we grew by 3%, but was it really the thing you're claiming it was, or was these 2 other things? So I think in many ways, it's less of a dollarization point than an altitude point. We have to be careful when we identify the drivers of value that we're identifying them at the right altitude, such that we can claim with some confidence the causal link between what we did and that particular outcome. And when you look at it from that perspective, I think, one of the things we actually focus on a lot at Ecosystems is not just the dollarized outcomes, but just more broadly quantitative ones and even qualitative outcomes that are sometimes equally, if not more important in terms of things like, for example, employee engagement, right? And you can ultimately take that out to things like attrition rates that can be quantified. And I suppose ultimately then those can be dollarized, but sometimes it is these interim metrics that matter most. Although whatever those metrics are, I think the key point, given everything we just talked about today, Usman, is getting the stakeholders to agree on that model, right? That's the crucial point. So in other words, it can be dollarized or not dollarized, quantify or quantitative or qualitative, as long as we all agree that that's the thing we're measuring, and then we have a collective belief in the causal chain that gets us from there to here, then we can rally around those metrics as the things that we measure over time, track, and put importance on. And I think having a system, a means, in our case, a technology to make that happen becomes really critical.
Yeah, so it's not only just dollarizing it, but it's what you're saying is that if the human aspects are not well balanced, we're going to have face attrition. And attrition is not only going to cost us lost customers and lost relationships, it's also going to cost us the fact that we have to find new people, ramp up new people, and we would have not taken that into account just because we would have had an omni goal, which is measured in terms of dollars, right?
That's exactly right.
Right. Yeah. So excellent. So I think we're ready. We're kind of coming up to the top of the hour. I think there are a few questions. Why did personality-driven sales matter? I think we've talked about it. It's human to human. Still, and Brent, of course, you've seen a lot of sales organizations, and you've been seeing them and studying them for a long period of time. And one of the things we also point out is that today there's a lot of data in the pipeline, right? There's a lot of data. Yeah. People are saying things and so on. It's actually more valuable data that we can process, which is one of the reasons we created XIQ, was that there was a lot of data in the pipeline, in the public networks and so on, that needed to be curated and distilled into valuable insights, such as personality insights or other sales trigger alerts, right? But coming back to my question, the question is that over time, are you seeing the human aspect of B2B selling receding, or actually becoming more, prevalent?
In terms of, well, I think that's actually the problem. What I see actually is a divergence. So there's it seems to be, I'm knocking SaaS a lot today. I apologize for those in the SaaS world listening, but there's a tendency in some sales organizations to gravitate more and more towards activity-driven metrics, things like number of calls per week, which convert to number of demos per month, which convert to number of opportunities in the pipeline that move to stage 5 every quarter, whatever it might. So that feels very, I don't know, inhumane, but inhuman, less human. It's all based on like, did you do this action? And we tend to overlook the customer's actual reaction to the fact that we committed that action, right? And what we see is just I see as an increasing disconnect between our actions and customer reactions. And the reason why is because the actions are driven by activity metrics and non-human factors like dashboards but the reactions are very human, right? And so that's where I think it becomes really interesting thing about how we're selling and engaging customers, not just with an understanding of have I checked a box on like number of calls I've made, but have I checked the box on authentically approaching them in a way that aligns to their personality and their needs to connect with other human beings to overcome these drivers of unconfidence or lower confidence. I don't know if that was too vague, Usman, but that's to me is what I think buying. I want to say it's becoming more human because I don't like we were less human before that, but rather I think there's a better appreciation in my research, at least today, to understand these very deeply human aspects of decision making. And it's not enough to simply say, yes, people buy, therefore we need to sell to people, but understanding the dynamics of group decision making, of credibility, of identity value. Something I'm really interested in studying more and more, as something we touched on in the past at Gartner, is these dimensions of value that speak not to my company or to me as a professional, but speak to me as a human being. And how do these dimensions of identity value become critical in these physics of decision making that we're talking about? And that's so I think it's always been there, but I think now what we find, just given how hard it is to decide and to buy, that they become critical to understand and address.
Beautiful. Taylor, I think we've gone over our hour and a lot of great discussion points, Brent. Thank you very much for shedding the light. Great. So I think, really, really valuable. You kind of highlighted the point that, the human dependency or the human engagement in B2B selling will stay. How we engage those different people, how we manage expectations, how we do the communication is going to be even more paramount. And so really, really insightful. I learned a lot today, Brent. Thank you so much. And I'm sure our audience was also pretty engaged, got a lot of good questions as well. So thanks so much for your time and coming.
You're welcome, Usman, and stay safe out there, everyone. And Usman, go blue, man.
Thank you. Go blue, indeed.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye-bye.